Hey guys, tonight we step into a Viking Longhouse together, not as raiders or rowdy guests, but as the sort of quiet, slightly nosy traveler who slips in at dusk and stands there blinking until the eyes adjust. The air is smoke blue and warm on your face. The roof above feels like a low sky stitched from rafters and turf. Somewhere to your right, a pair of spoons clinks in a wooden bowl. To your left, a dog thumps its tail once and decides you look harmless. You probably won't survive this, at least not the smell of sheep, smoke, and yesterday's stew, but you'll be fine for the next hour. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing when and where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push past the heavy door hanging, a coarse woolen curtain that sways like seaweed in a tide. The threshold is a beam polished by generations of feet, and you feel the tiny lift of the floor as you cross. Planked boards over packed earth, springy enough that every step answers with a quiet, friendly creak. Viking longhouses are practical, communal, and sturdier than they first look. Long rectangles of timber, turf, or stone depending on the region, shoulders hunched against wind, ribs of pine or oak overhead. A central aisle runs the length of the place like a hallway through a sleeping ship, with raised benches along the sides where people sit, talk, mend, and later, sleep. This layout is the mainstream fact you can trust. Benches, central hearth, shared space, one building doing the work of many. Smoke halos the hearth, the inescapable center of the room, a low oval of coals with iron tripods and sooty pots. There is no chimney in the modern sense. The smoke climbs, dithers, and drifts sideways, seeping out through the thatch and the gaps at the ridge, painting everything in a mild campfire glaze. You catch a hint of pine resin from a smeared pitch repair and the deeper kitchen notes: barley, fish, and a stewarding of salt that means the winter larder still has its dignity intact. You consider rating the Longhouse on an imaginary rental app. 5 stars for ambience, -2 for ventilation. Joke 1. To your right, a woman lifts a lid to check a simmering pot, and the vapor that rises smells like yesterday plus onions. The iron handle is wrapped with a twist of leather. Nearby, a set of tongs and a fire rake rest on a wedge of wood, tools as familiar to this place as cutlery to your kitchen. On a peg above the bench hang everyday treasures: a knife in a simple sheath, a bone comb, a string of keys that glint like tiny promises. The keys matter. Their authority on a ring, control of locked chests where cloth, silver, and household stores are guarded. If you've heard that women often manage the household, it's not just a story told to make a point. It's a daily reality here. The Longhouse breathes around you. Fabric rustles. Someone coughs. And a teenager in a woolen cap tries to stifle a laugh. For no reason except that laughter is a warm thing too. The dog uncoils and pads over to sniff your boots, deciding you might be a source of crumbs later. A cat is already on the bench, golden-eyed and aloof, the unofficial steward of the grain bins. You notice the light. There's not much of it. Little slits of window, if any. The hour's glow mostly comes from fire and tallow lamps. One lamp trembles on a shelf, a shallow stone bowl of fat with a plant fiber wick, its flame a small sun that has to be fed. You run fingertips along the bench edge, finding whorls in the wood where someone idly carved spirals during a story last winter. Here's a quirky tidbit to pocket. Some households keep a house spirit spot, a shelf or post with a carved symbol, a discreet offering of ale, or a bread heel tucked there on certain days. Not because it's in the law code, but because it feels right, and because you never argue with the luck of a roof. On the rafters, charms hang. Little Thor's hammers hammered from iron, a small whalebone token polished like frost, and bundles of herbs tied up to dry, their shadows dancing like gossip. The dimensions register. In some regions, longhouses stretch 40 meters or more, though most are modest, 15 to 20. The roof is turf-layered and heavy, thick enough to mute the wind to a constant hush. You can almost hear waves in the hush, even if you are inland. the Norse imagination keeps the sea nearby. Historians still argue whether every longhouse included livestock under the same roof in winter, or if that was more common on particular farms and in particular climates, but you catch a whiff that suggests a couple of sheep might be stalled behind a half wall at the far end. Their bleats burble faintly, like someone practicing a reed flute behind a curtain. You ease along the aisle, learning the house the way you learn a friend's voice, by tone, by pauses. A lidded chest doubles as a seat. Beneath it, a pair of shoes made from fish skin. Yes, fish skin, dry by the warmth, their texture shimmering like cracked ice. You file that away, an odd little piece of the Viking world that feels both pragmatic and stylish in an unadvertised way. The benches are strewn with woven blankets, some coarse and sheepish, some soft in a colored twill that picks up firelight. At your knee, a spindle whorl rolls over like a sleepy pebble. Someone will be annoyed they misplaced it, in a gentle longhouse kind of way. You smell tar and salt on a man's cloak and realize he's recently come from the shore or the river. He nods, the nod that says, yes, sit, warm your hands, the way we all are temporarily borrowing warmth from the same fire. Someone else pours ale from a clay jug, carefully, because wasting foam is a sin no saga bothers to list. Too obvious. You take a wooden cup, notice the ring inside where last night's foam dried in a crescent, and promise yourself you'll sip politely, not gulp like a sea monster. Joke 2. The ale is mild and familiar. The cup is smoother than it looks. You meet the architecture again. The ridgepole above, a spine laid straight. The posts, each one a tree that remembers wind. Between timbers, the wall is wattle and daub in places. A woven pattern smeared with clay, straw, and dung, honest and warm. Along the roofline you see where new thatch has been tucked in, a slightly different shade, like a fresh page bound into an old book. Whoever maintains this place does so with hands that know where the leaks begin. By the doorway, a pair of wooden shoes, clogs almost, wait on a peg, shaped to keep feet dry in the yard's churn. A small boy hangs a carved toy horse beside them, its legs worn smooth from imaginary gallops. He's supposed to be quiet, and he is, but you can tell he's cataloging your strange boots with scientific intensity. Later he'll attempt to copy them with a scrap of leather and an unreasonable amount of string. A woman passes carrying a lidded bucket. The handle creaks, and you catch a sweet note, whey or buttermilk. Butter is serious business here, churned in tall wooden churns, salted, stored, traded. In high summer, some of it might even be clarified into ghee-like stores. And yes, you've heard rumors about rancid butter hair gel, but here's the reality check whisper. Soap made with lye gives hair a bright, sometimes golden cast. Cleanliness is not alien to this world, even if the smoke is. You step closer to the fire, and someone pokes the coals. Sparks scoot up and vanish into the roof, where the turf holds them like a sensible parent. You can see how the longhouse anchors community, births, deaths, deals, gossip, marriages, jokes, silence when needed. This is not the crash and clatter of a raid. This is the steady hum of a life. And it's somehow even louder in its quiet. If you pause and listen, you can hear the old wood talking in tiny clicks as it shifts, as if the rafters are telling each other a story they've told every night for 100 years. You are offered a slice of barley bread. It's dense, with a scatter of cracked grains that crunch softly, and you nod gratitude because bread in any age is a treaty between strangers. Someone asks where you've come from. You answer with a gesture to the door and the dusk beyond. This satisfies them. They set a piece of smoked fish on your bread like an exclamation mark, and you smile. Smoke-flavored everything is the house specialty. Some modern restaurant would charge extra and call it heritage cuisine. Joke 3. Behind you, a short ladder rises to a loft space. Storage mostly, sometimes sleeping in a pinch. A bundle of dried cod hangs there like wooden boards. Rope coils rest beside it, smelling of tar and salt. A small bronze balance scale, neatly wrapped in cloth, peeks from a chest. Someone here weighs silver when it matters. Another peg holds a cloak pin, brooch-like, the kind that keeps a heavy wool mantle from giving up the fight against gravity. When you touch your own cloak, a few sparks of static tick your fingertips. Winter is coming, but not yet. You glance up once more at the roof. Historians still argue whether smoke vents were ever purpose-cut, or if people simply relied on leakage through thatch and the ridge. Tonight, the ridge wins the argument by existing and working in its drafty, dependable way. A curl of smoke threads out, and the house blinks back, relieved. Around you, the longhouse settles as if to say, "You're in, you're warm, and we can start." You sit on the bench, tuck your cup into the angle of the arm, and feel the stone heat of the fire working into your shins, the cool of the wall at your back, the hum of voices starting to wind down as evening takes its long breath. No raids, no shouting. Just the architecture of people pooling their warmth under a roof that has seen more winters than you will. You let your shoulders drop. You are, for the moment, home. You drift closer to the glow because everyone does, sooner or later. The hearth is not only warm, it's gravitational. It holds the room in orbit, a steady orange planet where all the courses, meals, chores, memories, cross. Someone nudges a log inward with the iron fire rake, and sparks whisper upward, trying their luck at the roof before the damp thatch gently says, "Not tonight." You settle on the bench's edge and feel your shins begin to thaw. A pleasant ache like ice surrendering. Conversations tilt toward the coals, soft, gossipy, and honest in that way people are when they are too warm to perform. The tripod over the fire looks like a piece of patient geometry. 3 iron legs, a hook chain, a blackened pot so seasoned it could probably stand upright on its own pride. A flat griddle stone leans at the margin, waiting for another round of barley cakes. You watch as a hand sprinkles a finger pinch of salt. Nothing theatrical, just the right kind of ordinary. Here's your mainstream fact. Most longhouses run on central hearths without chimneys, using the gentle leak of smoke through thatch and roof gaps for ventilation. The smoke dries rafters, preserves meat hung in the eaves, and perfumes every cloak like a slow-burning incense of forest and kitchen. A woman lifts the pot lid, and out breathes a stew that has been alive for days. Additions, revisions, little negotiations of flavor. It's barley and fish tonight, with a shy carrot or two, and the faint, lovable sour of yesterday's broth. Someone passing cracks a joke about borrowing a ladle of the neighbor's stew, which is less theft and more neighborhood research. You're offered a taste. You blow on the wooden spoon, take a sip, and nod like you've just been allowed into a mild secret. Across the fire, your dog friend from earlier dreams his way through a rabbit chase, paws twitching. He's definitely on stove watch duty, just in case gravity fails and something falls, joke 1. On a shelf sits a shallow tallow lamp, a stone saucer with a wick that drinks from rendered animal fat. The flame is not bright, but it is stubborn. Every so often someone trims the wick with a knife, quick and careful, and a tiny halo brightens. There are 2 more lamps farther down the room, their combined light a necklace of small moons. Beside the lamp, herbs tied with red yarn, because red keeps things lucky. A bone spoon, a little clay whistle that a child will not touch, which is to say will absolutely touch as soon as you look away. Heat dries a line of socks strung overhead like prayer flags for warm toes, a quiet liturgy to the god of not getting chilblains. You learn the house through its tools. The iron trivet for setting pots closer or farther from the heat. A wooden ladle with a split repaired by pegging in a sliver of horn. A stone pot, the kind of soapstone vessel common in some northern regions, that holds heat like a polite dragon. There's a small wooden box of salt, righteously guarded. Salt is winter backbone, a firm handshake from summer to spring. A lidded bucket with a wooden dipper, not for stew, you're assured with a smile, because lines must be drawn somewhere. Historians still argue whether bread ovens were typically separate structures, safer, less smoky, or sometimes tucked into the longhouse itself. In this place, you suspect they bake flatbread right on the griddle stone and call it efficiency. Gossip, of course, is the other fuel. While the fire eats wood, the room chews gently on the news. The boy with the carved toy horse learns, by pretending not to listen, that two families traded a goat for a bolt of bright cloth, that the pasture gate needs mending, that someone's cousin has come back from far south with a story about a market where fish is sold already salted. Scandalous convenience. You notice how the talk flows without the hard edges of politics tonight. Any bargaining is wrapped in the soft bread of humor. A man brags, just a little, that his ale turned out clear as a lake. Everyone thinks of the peaty pond they fetched from and lets the boast warm its hands here anyway. Joke 2. A quirky tidbit finds you. At the far end near the door, tucked behind a half wall, a small clay pot holds a kindling nest. Crumbled bark, a curl of birch, and a piece of bracket fungus. Amadou, sponged and ready. Fire here is too precious to risk starting from scratch every time. Embers are banked at night under ash, kept breathing but slow, the way you tuck a child into sleep. Hush now. Keep your heat. Don't wander. In lean places like Iceland, where wood is scarce, people burn driftwood, dried turf, even dung. You can smell the difference if you've grown up in it, the way a city kid knows subway lines by the sound of approaching wheels. The Longhouse has recipes not only for food but for fuel. A handful of chips, a twist of straw, a patient breath, and the day begins again. You watch hands at work in the firelight. A spindle whirl pirouettes. The thread grows like a road where there was only air. Someone scrapes a skin, the rhythm steady, the smell faintly wild. A woman sockets a bronze pin into her cloak, and the glint is a sunrise in miniature. Children stage a quiet siege with wooden blocks and a sheep-shaped hostage nobody is allowed to actually tie up. A man repairs a broken rivet on a bucket hoop with the exact attention of a person who has learned that water will find any excuse to leave if you give it one. There's a rhythm to tending the hearth that isn't written down, but is absolutely law. Poke, pull, feed, breathe, bank. In the morning, the embers are teased awake. Midday, the fire breathes deeper to cook porridge or fish. Evening, the flames sit lower, more lamp than furnace, so the room can yawn itself towards sleep. You become one more pair of eyes glancing at the coals as you talk, the way modern people half watch a screen. The fire is the original autoplay, joke 3. Someone brings out a small rack from the eaves, a string of meat, half-smoked, its color deep and confident. They slice slivers and pass them around with a side of early winter apples, tart enough to make your jaw sing. The smoke has done its work. It tastes like storybook forests and holidays, while also being the practical triumph of nothing going to waste. Overhead, more hangs to cure. Fish like wooden fans, bits of cheese in cloth, herbs crinkled into fragile green thunder. If you lean back, you realize you have been inhaling the pantry all evening. You notice how the hearth redraws the house's map. At the fire line, there's a ring of now. Whoever is within that circle is part of the present conversation. Beyond, at the benches, time drifts slower. Someone can drop out, nap, drift, mend, and the Longhouse keeps them in its pocket. Farther still, behind a curtain or a half-wall, are private corners, chests, blankets, whispers that want only the lamp and a listening ear. In a place with few doors, zones are drawn with warmth and light. A practical aside arrives like a visitor, the lye soap. You watched earlier as someone poured hot lye through ash to clean a pot blackened by devotion to stew. There's a bright cleanliness to it, not a chemical sparkle but a thrifty kind. The same alkali habits that can leave hair looking paler over time also keep wool tunics from turning into archaeological experiments. If your modern nose wants more lavender, the herbs overhead are ready. A handful crumbled into rinse water becomes a domestic perfume that even the cat respects. Back at the coals, a lad lifts a coal with tongs and sets it in a small, lidded ember box for a neighbor who'll be home late. Here's community in miniature. Sharing fire, like sharing a sentence you've found comforting. Historians still argue whether households held sacred taboos about letting the hearth go dark, if keeping flame alive was superstition or mere convenience. Either way, when the ember box leaves the room, it feels like a little comet crossing, carrying a pocket of home through the dark. As night deepens, the lamps seem brighter without changing at all. Breath turns lazy. Voices lower to that comforting octave where the words are less important than the nearness. The hearth throws a last, showy lick at a knot in the wood, which hisses and goes quiet. You feel yourself being tugged into the same rhythm. Slow blinks, long exhale. A spine that admits it likes benches more than it claimed earlier. The house hums, and the heart of it keeps time. The bench you've chosen creaks but doesn't protest. It's long and sturdy, worn to a smoothness that only centuries of bodies can polish. At first, you're just visiting, but sooner or later you'll have to think about where you'll sleep in this communal ship of wood and wool. There are no bedrooms here, just benches doubling as beds. Straw mattresses if you're lucky, blankets if you're loved, and a neighbor's snore if fate decides to play its little joke. You glance down the length of the hall. Families stake out their territories. A chest that serves as a headboard, a sheepskin thrown across a bench, a child's carved toy placed like a sentry at the edge of the bedding. Privacy is a polite fiction. Sound carries everywhere, so conversations at one end of the house may ripple all the way to the far end like gossip carried on smoke. The fire is low now, embers blinking, and people begin the slow migration from sitting upright to curling sideways. Mainstream fact time. Viking longhouses almost always had raised side benches that doubled as sleeping platforms. Excavations in Iceland and Norway show post holes where wooden benches ran the entire length, sometimes even layered with chests or straw mattresses. This design isn't just clever, it keeps sleepers off the cold earth and tucks them closer to the warmth of the fire. Think of it as an early version of bunk beds, minus the wobbly ladder and the sibling elbow wars. You run your hand over the bedding, coarse wool blankets, slightly scratchy but warm. The straw beneath is crunchy and smells faintly sweet, like autumn fields tucked under your shoulder. Occasionally a chicken feather pokes through, a tiny reminder of how many lives donate comfort to one night's sleep. Someone has tucked herbs under the mattress. Yarrow, mint, maybe even a dash of mugwort, believed to ward off insects and bad dreams alike. You're grateful. Nothing ruins a bedtime story faster than bedbugs, even in the Viking Age. A boy stretches out next to his father, using the man's arm as a pillow, while his mother folds her cloak beneath her own head. You think of your memory foam pillow back home and laugh quietly. This cloak is multi-purpose. Bedding by night, armor against wind by day, a tablecloth in emergencies, and occasionally a towel after an ill-advised swim. Joke 1. Vikings believed in getting value out of every item, and tonight you admire the sheer thrift of a cloak. At the far bench, an older woman murmurs a lullaby. It's half song, half prayer, a blend of rhythm and repetition that calms as much by sound as by meaning. You don't understand the words, but you understand the intention. A fence against the dark built of syllables. Someone coughs. Someone else sighs into a snore. The dog, true to form, wedges himself between two sleeping children, his body heat considered a perfectly acceptable quilt. The cat chooses the warmest lap still awake and claims it like property. Quirky tidbit for you. Sometimes families slept not only with pets but also with small livestock. Sheep, goats, even calves could be penned at the far end of the longhouse in winter, the thin half wall separating them from human beds. The benefit? Heat. Animals are little furnaces, and their warmth seeps into the human side. The downside? They smell like, well, animals. And they occasionally make themselves known at inconvenient hours. You decide tonight that you're fine being separated by that low wall, but you admit the extra degree of warmth would be welcome. Historians still argue whether these long communal sleeping arrangements created a stronger sense of togetherness, or more nightly irritation. Was sharing snores, fidgets, and whispered dreams bonding? Or was it simply survival necessity in a world without central heating? You lie back and think about it as a neighbor rolls over, bumping into your arm. Bonding, maybe. Survival, certainly. A young woman across the aisle is combing her hair by lamplight, the strokes steady, hypnotic. Her comb is bone, carved with spirals, the teeth polished by years of daily use. She braids quickly, fingers nimble, before pulling a blanket around her shoulders. Grooming before bed seems to soothe her the way scrolling a phone does for you. a ritual of winding down. You think she'd probably roll her eyes at TikTok, but she'd get the impulse. The benches become a patchwork of small worlds. One family is already deep in sleep. Another is still sharing a few whispers, their words low, like a secret carried to the rafters. The fire glows on everyone's cheeks, and shadows play across the beams like restless guardians. You adjust your bedding. The straw pokes a little, but after a day of labor, nobody here complains. Sleep is practical, not luxurious. Dreams matter, though. If someone dreams of a white bear, it might be a sign. If someone dreams of fish, it might mean good luck, or bad, depending on who you ask. You realize quickly that dreams here are treated as morning gossip material, not just nighttime nonsense. One boy shifts, groans, and mutters a word you don't catch. His mother strokes his hair, soothing him back down. He breathes evenly again. It's oddly comforting, watching strangers knit themselves together in the dark, like pieces of a single blanket. The benches sigh. The longhouse exhales. The smoke thins as the logs collapse inward. A woman closest to the fire reaches out with practiced precision, nudges a coal into place, and pulls her hand back without breaking rhythm in her conversation. These gestures are centuries old, muscle memory across generations. You could almost believe the longhouse itself is tucking everyone in. Somewhere, outside, the wind hums across the turf roof. Inside, you feel its faint fingers only at the edges, where the thatch meets the wall. Otherwise, you're sealed into warmth, noise, and the strange intimacy of a house that refuses to let you be alone. You lie back, blanket pulled up, listening to the overlapping rhythms, a baby sighing, a man snoring like a lazy saw, the dog's paws twitching, the embers cracking like miniature applause. You let yourself join the orchestra of breath. Sleep here isn't individual, it's communal. Everyone drifts together, the longhouse itself rocking gently like a cradle, carrying you all into the same night. Morning sneaks in quietly, though it has to work harder than you expect. The longhouse is stingy with light, those tiny slits of windows more symbolic than functional, and so dawn arrives as a gradual brightening of smoke rather than a grand sunrise. You open your eyes to the rustle of bodies stirring, the faint shuffle of wool blankets, and the unmistakable sound of a chicken clucking somewhere far too close to your head. Yes, breakfast has arrived in the form of a feathered alarm clock. Snooze button not included. The hearth embers glow dully, banked overnight beneath their ash blanket. Someone crouches there now, blowing gently, coaxing sparks into new flames. It's a ritual as old as the house itself. Lean close, feed a sliver of kindling, wait for the soft whoosh as fire remembers it has a job. Soon enough, the longhouse smells like smoke, porridge, and ambition. That is to say, people are ready to start another day. Mainstream fact first. Mornings in a Viking household were practical affairs. Excavations and written sources suggest a rhythm of feeding animals, stirring porridge, and tending to chores before the day's bigger labors began. No slow brew of espresso here. Energy came from barley gruel, dried fish, and determination. You stretch your legs from the bench bed and pretend the straw mattress has left you refreshed. Really, your back feels like you've wrestled a stubborn goat all night, but you'll call that an authentic cultural experience. Joke 1. Someone ladles out a thick porridge, barley simmered with milk if there's some to spare, or just water if not. You're handed a wooden bowl with a wooden spoon, both smoother than you expect from so much use. The porridge is hot, filling, and tastes faintly smoky from being cooked over last night's embers. A drizzle of honey, if the family is lucky, transforms it into something almost indulgent. You savor it slowly, watching others spoon theirs down quickly before heading outside. Children wake reluctantly, hair tousled, faces creased with straw marks from their bedding. A girl helps her mother brush the ashes from the hearthside and spread fresh rushes along the aisle floor. The smell of the herbs mixed with the rushes, sweet gale maybe, brightens the room and makes the longhouse feel like it's taken a deep breath. Even chores are scented here, and chores are the language of morning. Men gather tools, axes sharpened for splitting firewood, hose for tending fields, buckets for hauling water. Women lean over looms, resuming yesterday's weaving, or check the brewing vat to see if yesterday's ale has behaved. Younger boys head out with herding sticks, dogs trotting at their heels, ready to round up the sheep and goats. Everyone has a role, and the morning hum is simply the house stretching outward into fields, barns, and tasks. A quirky tidbit interrupts. One boy yawns so wide he nearly drops his spoon, and his grandmother chuckles, muttering about catching a sole flying out. Some families, you learn, believed yawning uncovered the spirit to mischief or ill luck if not covered properly. The boy immediately clamps his hand over his mouth as though sealing a secret. You smile. This is a world where even small gestures carry weight. You notice how the longhouse empties gradually. At first, everyone is gathered around the fire, but soon the seats are bare. One man shoulders a yoke with 2 buckets, heading for the well. Another ties on a pair of shoes, stitched from fish skin, the scales gleaming faintly in the light. A girl tucks a comb into her belt before disappearing through the doorway, because you never know when you'll need to look presentable, even to sheep. Historians still argue whether mornings here were quiet or noisy. Some sagas paint households buzzing with chatter and preparation. Archaeological evidence hints at efficiency and routine, suggesting people may have conserved words until the work was underway. This morning feels like both. Bursts of chatter near the hearth, then long silences as groups drift out into the world. The longhouse itself feels calmer with each departure. Its air less crowded, its smoke less stirred. You watch as a mother sets aside a bit of porridge in a small wooden bowl. Not for herself, but for what she calls the house spirit, leaving it discreetly near a carved post. Whether it's superstition, habit, or just good manners, it's a reminder. You don't live in a longhouse alone. You live with people, animals, gods, and unseen presences, all of whom need acknowledgement before the day can run smoothly. With bellies filled and cloaks slung across shoulders, most of the household heads out. Through the doorway you glimpse the yard. Chickens scatter, dogs bark, and frost clings to the grass like a thin, white quilt. You step to the threshold, the cold air cutting across your cheeks, sharp and bracing. Behind you, the longhouse sighs in its smoky warmth. Before you, the day waits with its chores. One man grins at you, rubbing his hands together. Better than raiding, he jokes, and you nod because you're beginning to understand. Survival is the true adventure. Raids may make the sagas, but mornings like this keep the sagas possible. Someone sneezes, loudly, and 3 others chorus, blessing. Though whether it's from Odin, Thor, or a grandmother's good humor is left unspoken. You wrap your cloak tighter, step out, and hear the crunch of frost underfoot. Behind you, someone banks the fire again, making sure it will welcome the household home later. The smell of porridge lingers in your hair, smoky and sweet, a reminder that longhouse mornings are practical, ordinary, and oddly comforting. This is not glory, but it is life, and life hums louder than any saga when you let it. You don't need to be told twice that breakfast was only a warm-up. The real test of the longhouse's heart comes when the feasting begins. Food is the spine of social life here, the excuse for gathering, joking, haggling, and deciding who's worth trusting with your extra jar of butter. Tonight, you're lucky enough to slide into a place on the bench as a meal grows from the hearth outward, filling the air with scents that make your stomach protest like a neglected goat. On the central fire, a stew bubbles again, barley at its base, because barley is to the Viking age what pasta is to Italy. Versatile, cheap, and always there whether you want it or not. Someone stirs with a wooden ladle, scraping the bottom gently so nothing clings. Into the pot go onions, a fistful of dried herbs, and chunks of dried fish softened back to life in broth. The steam curls upward like a curtain rising. Mainstream fact: fish and barley were everyday staples, salted or dried to last through the winter, often paired with dairy when available. Meat was not absent, but was precious, reserved for occasions or households with plenty. Alongside the stew, a woman lays flatbread onto a hot stone set at the edge of the fire. The bread is thin, crisping in patches, and smells faintly nutty. When she flips it with her bare fingers, you wince, but she doesn't. Those fingers have long been fireproofed by practice. She sprinkles it with coarse salt and stacks the rounds into a pile that quickly shrinks as children steal them, too quick for scolding. You get one too, torn in half and handed over without a word, and it tastes like something honest. Grain, smoke, and a bit of ash you decide to call seasoning. Joke 1. Clay jugs of ale are brought out, amber liquid sloshing gently. This isn't a strong drink, it's everyday ale. Low in alcohol, but safer than water and friendlier to morale. A man pours carefully into wooden cups, each one bearing faint notches from years of use. The foam settles lazily. When you lift your own cup, you notice the lip is worn smooth by countless mouths. You sip, nod politely, and think, yes, this is hydration with ambitions. Quirky tidbit, honey is treated like treasure here, and when someone produces a small crock, there's a collective leaning in. Honey sweetens, preserves, and ferments into mead, but it is scarce. The host drizzles a thin ribbon over a loaf of bread, and the children stare as though witnessing a miracle. You get a dab on your flatbread, and the sweetness nearly startles you after so much salt and smoke. You're reminded that sugar won't become common in Europe for centuries. Honey is dessert, medicine, and luxury rolled into one golden drop. As the bowls of stew make their rounds, conversation shifts into a comfortable buzz. A man tells the story of a stubborn goat that refused to come down from the roof until bribed with turnips. Everyone laughs, mostly because everyone here has also known a goat with delusions of grandeur. You laugh too, spoon halfway to your mouth, because nothing bonds people faster than agreeing animals are ridiculous. Joke 2. The hearth hosts more than stew tonight. A flat iron pan sizzles with small cakes made of curdled milk and flour, the proto-pancakes of the north. They're browned at the edges, soft in the middle, and devoured almost as quickly as they appear. You're handed one, hot enough to sting your fingertips, and you juggle it for a moment before biting in. Tangy, chewy, satisfying. It feels like a cousin to every comfort food you've ever had. Someone brings out a wooden platter of smoked lamb, thin slices carved off and shared sparingly. The meat is rich, salted, and tastes like months of patience rewarded. You chew slowly, respectfully. It's not every night you're offered meat. A girl offers you a bit of soft cheese alongside it, crumbly and faintly sour. Together, they are more than food. They're proof of planning, care, and an ecosystem that ties pasture to plate. Historians still argue whether feasts in everyday Viking households were formal affairs or simply larger versions of daily meals. Sagas love to describe roaring banquets with mountains of roasted meat and endless horns of mead, but archaeology suggests that most meals were modest, even when guests were present. Tonight feels like something in between. No silver platters, but plenty of sharing, plenty of laughter, and an undeniable sense that food tastes better when you don't have to eat it alone. You notice the etiquette. Food is passed clockwise. The eldest are served first. Children learn by watching, by being told gently where their hands should and shouldn't go. Everyone eats from bowls carved from wood, horn spoons clicking softly against their sides. Leftovers are not wasted. Tomorrow's breakfast will be built from tonight's remnants. Waste here is not just frowned upon, it's unthinkable. The dog, ever patient, sits just outside the invisible circle of acceptable begging. Every now and then, someone flicks him a bone or a crust, pretending not to notice when he catches it midair. The cat, less patient, steals a bit of fish directly off a child's plate, and the child shrieks before laughing. The room ripples with amusement, and you realize that even pets are part of the feast. A man leans over and offers you a slice of apple, shriveled from storage, but still tart. He winks, explaining that these are the best from autumn's harvest. You chew it, appreciating the stubborn sweetness, and think about how much care must go into keeping fruit edible through the long, dark months. A barrel of apples is more than food. It's insurance against hunger. By the time bowls are scraped clean and bread reduced to crumbs, the fire has burned down to glowing coals. Cups are emptied, stories are winding down, and a collective sigh spreads through the benches. People lean back, satisfied, tired in the good way. You stretch too, belly full, and think about how this wasn't just a meal, it was a declaration. We are here, we are fed, and we are together. Someone pats their stomach and groans theatrically, to the amusement of everyone nearby. You laugh too, because some jokes really do cross centuries. Feasting might not make the sagas, but it makes the nights. And here in the Longhouse, nights are what you remember. You've had your fill, and now you're aware of something you've been ignoring since the moment you ducked through the doorway: the itch. Viking life is wrapped in wool, and wool doesn't care how delicate your skin is. You tug at the edge of your tunic, scratch discreetly, and glance around to see if anyone else is fighting the same silent battle. They are. It's part of the uniform here, the daily wool wrestle. Wool is everywhere. Tunic, trousers, cloaks, blankets. It keeps you alive in cold that would send modern you sprinting back to central heating. And despite your current itch, it's valuable enough to be currency. Families keep sheep not just for milk and meat, but for fleece, which is spun, dyed, and woven into garments. Mainstream fact: wool production was central to the Norse economy. Even everyday folk wore layered wool tunics, with linen underneath if they could afford it, to soften the scratch. Linen was smoother, but flax needed the right soil and a great deal of labor. So, wool it is. You look down at your tunic, straight cut, long sleeves, cinched with a belt. Practical, plain. Beside you, though, someone wears a tunic edged with bright braid. The trim is tablet woven, geometric, neat, and far too clever for you to replicate. That braid says, "This family knows its craft." Across the room, a woman's cloak is pinned with a brooch, oval-shaped, shining faintly in the lamplight. These brooches aren't just pretty, they're functional. They fasten the overdress, suspend strings of beads or keys, and declare status louder than words. You catch yourself admiring the gleam, then hoping no one notices you gawking. Quirky tidbit. Some Vikings experimented with colors you wouldn't expect. Woad gave blues, madder gave reds, birch bark gave yellows. There are even traces suggesting purple dyes in some places, though getting that shade might mean crushing a mountain of lichens or trading for snail-based dye, which is not the most practical investment. So, when you see a splash of bright red or blue in a longhouse, you're looking at chemistry, patience, and maybe a little showing off. As the evening stretches, the room turns into an impromptu dressing room. A man pulls off his heavy cloak, shakes out straw, and folds it neatly. His boots are leather, laced up the front, patched in places that tell stories of muddy fields. A woman beside him runs her fingers through wool she's carded into fluff, twisting it into thread while chatting. The act of spinning is so constant here, it's almost background noise. Thread for weaving, weaving for clothing, clothing for survival. The Longhouse is a fashion house. If your definition of fashion includes the phrase, "Will this keep frostbite away?" Historians still argue whether Viking-age clothing was mostly drab or surprisingly colorful. Archaeological finds leave only fragments. Wool disintegrates, dyes fade, so it's hard to pin down the palette of everyday life. Some say muted browns and grays. Others insist on bright splashes, especially for festivals. Looking around tonight, you see both. Plain wool for work, flashes of red or blue for pride. It's not haute couture, but it's not dull either. You tug at your belt and realize belts here are more than waistlines. They're toolkits. Knives, pouches, combs, even fire strikers dangle from them. One man's belt looks like a medieval Swiss Army knife, minus the corkscrew. You imagine him jingling whenever he walks? A human wind chime of utility. Joke 1. Nearby, a girl braids her sister's hair into two neat plaits, then tucks them under a scarf. Hair is treated like clothing, practical, symbolic, and occasionally stylish. Men wear it long or cropped, beards are tended, combs are common. You spot a comb carved from antler, teeth polished by decades of hair. Cleanliness isn't just vanity, it's protection against lice. And if lice win anyway, well, there's always a good soak in the steam hut. You make a note to ask where the nearest steam hut is, preferably before you itch yourself bald. A boy shows off his new pair of shoes, stitched from reindeer hide, soles thick and uneven but sturdy. He grins proudly as he stomps, and you grin back, impressed. Shoes wear out fast here, and having a new pair is worth bragging about. You glance at your own boots and wonder if they'd survive a single Viking winter. The answer is probably no. Quirky detail again. Some women wear strings of glass beads, shimmering green or blue, imported from far away. Each bead is a story of trade routes, maybe from the Frankish lands, maybe even from the Middle East. Imagine explaining that your necklace has traveled farther than most people you know. You catch one woman absently rolling a bead between her fingers, like a talisman. And of course, there's smell. Let's not pretend it isn't there. Wool, smoke, leather, animals. But you're surprised by how many layers of herbs and resins cut through. Juniper branches tossed on the fire, mint tied in bunches, tar rubbed into boots. The Longhouse smells alive, not foul, more earthy than offensive. You've smelled modern gyms after a spin class. This is nothing in comparison, joke 2. One man adjusts the clasp on his cloak. A penannular brooch, bronze, elegant in its simplicity. He slides it through wool, twists it, and secures it with the smoothness of someone who's done this every day since childhood. It's practical, but it's also artistry. You wonder how many mornings were saved by inventing a pin that doesn't fall apart halfway through a windy walk. Historians still argue whether clothing here was deliberately styled for status, or if status simply showed up in the materials people could afford. Was a dyed cloak a bold fashion choice, or just the luck of having trade connections? You look around and see both arguments woven into the fabric. Some dress plainly because that's what they have, others flaunt color or silver because they can. The debate may never be settled, but the evidence is standing right in front of you, tugging at sleeves and brushing crumbs off wool tunics. You pull your own cloak tighter and grin as you realize that, scratchy or not, you're comfortable. Wool may itch, but it holds warmth like a secret, and that's what matters here. Besides, the itch is temporary. The warmth is survival. And if you look stylish while enduring both, well, that's just a bonus. As the night settles deeper, the Longhouse is filled with the swish of wool, the clink of brooches, the quiet hum of spinning, and the laughter that comes when someone admits they've put their tunic on inside out. Yes, fashion fails happen then too. Joke 3. You settle into your place, wrapped in wool, part of the Longhouse's tapestry of comfort and color. You're pulled outside now, away from the smoky warmth, into air that bites a little harder. The Longhouse has its rhythm, but so do the fields, and those rhythms demand your body as much as your appetite. The soil looks dark and patient, waiting for hands and tools to argue with it. You take a hoe, feel its wooden shaft warm from use, and suddenly you're part of the morning chorus. Boots crunching, animals shuffling, and the occasional muttered complaint about the mud. Mainstream fact: Viking-age households were farming households first and foremost. Raids may have earned them fame, but agriculture was what actually kept people alive. Barley, rye, oats, and flax were common crops, supplemented by animal husbandry: sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle. The Longhouse wasn't just a home, it was a hub for the fields that stretched around it. Without the harvest, the sagas would be nothing but very short stories. You drag the hoe through the soil, your breath puffing like little clouds. Nearby, a boy scatters seed from a woven pouch, his hand swinging rhythmically. Chickens follow him like opportunists at a buffet line, pecking at whatever he drops. The boy shoos them with exaggerated seriousness, which only makes the chickens more determined. Watching the battle of wills, you realize that farming is equal parts labor and comedy. Joke 1. Women head to the small plots nearer the house where vegetables grow: onions, cabbages, peas. A girl tugs weeds with fierce determination, her fingers blackened with soil, then wipes them on her apron, as though the apron hasn't already given up the fight days ago. In the distance, you hear men driving oxen, pulling a simple wooden plow through the earth. The plow creaks, the oxen snort, and a man mutters encouragement that sounds like a negotiation more than a command. Quirky tidbit: haymaking wasn't just a chore, it was survival strategy. Grass had to be cut, dried, and stacked to feed livestock through winter. In some places, hay was so precious that people cut even the tufts growing on roofs and cliff edges, roping themselves down to harvest them. Imagine explaining to your family that you're going to dangle off a cliff for a handful of grass. Practical? Yes. Ridiculous? Also yes. Closer to the longhouse, women spread laundry over wooden racks, letting the wind do its work. You can smell soap, sharp and clean, cutting through the earthier farm scents. Wool tunics flap like flags, announcing to the neighborhood that yes, this family washes its clothes. The sight makes you think of your own laundry pile at home, and suddenly your washing machine feels like the greatest invention of all time. Historians still argue whether Viking farming techniques were advanced compared to their contemporaries. Some claim they were highly efficient, using crop rotation and careful fertilization with manure and ash. Others suggest they were rough and ready, relying on brute effort and sheer endurance. As you watch a man spread ashes from the hearth across the field, you suspect the truth is in between. Simple tools, yes, but clever use of every resource. Waste is not in the vocabulary here. The animals add their voices to the scene. Sheep bleat as they're led to pasture, their wool already imagining itself as next year's clothing. A pig escapes briefly, trotting proudly until two children corner it with sticks, laughing all the while. Cows lumber to a watering trough, their bells clanking softly. You watch a woman milk one, steady hands, steady rhythm, the stream hissing into a wooden bucket. The cat waits nearby, because cats understand the universal law. Where there is milk, there are drips. The fields stretch wider than you expect, broken by fences and hedges, dotted with low barns. A man passes carrying a scythe over his shoulder, blade glinting in the sun. He nods at you, the nod that says, "We work, or we starve." You nod back, then promptly trip over a furrow, nearly dropping your hoe. Laughter erupts from the boy scattering seed, and you admit it, you're not cut out for this. He smirks as though he's just bested you in a saga duel, joke 2. You pause to catch your breath and notice the way the land feels both crowded and vast. Every patch of soil is claimed, worked, defended against hunger. But beyond the fields lies forest and sea, the endless backdrop that makes farms feel like islands of certainty. You imagine winter, when snow smothers everything and the fields rest under their white blankets. In those months, the memory of this work, hands in soil, sun on back, becomes fuel for enduring. Nearby, a group of women tend flax, pulling stalks from the ground, soaking them, and preparing them for spinning into linen. The process is long and finicky, but linen softens what wool cannot, and you respect the patience it requires. One woman shows you how the fibers peel away from the woody core, her hands quick and sure. She laughs when you fumble and mutter something about city hands. She's not wrong. Quirky tidbit again. Manure was more than fertilizer. Dried dung could also be fuel, especially in treeless places like Iceland. You spot a neat stack of dried patties near the barn, looking suspiciously like oversized cookies. You decide not to imagine biting into one. Yet here, they're precious, because winter does not negotiate. Historians still argue about how self-sufficient Viking farms were. Some evidence suggests they grew and made almost everything they needed: food, clothing, tools, while other finds show that trade was essential. Watching this farm, you suspect both are true. Most things are homemade, but the occasional imported bead or iron tool shines like a reminder of connections beyond the horizon. By midday, your arms ache, your boots are muddy, and you're beginning to understand why feasts matter so much. Food isn't just sustenance. It's the victory prize after long battles with earth and weather. You lean on your hoe, sweat on your forehead despite the cool air, and glance back toward the longhouse. Smoke curls upward, promising warmth and stew when the work is done. You decide that farming may not be glamorous, but it's the real epic here. As you trudge back, a chicken runs across your path, chased by a child wielding a stick like a sword. The chicken wins, obviously. You laugh, realizing that sagas might celebrate warriors, but out here, chickens are undefeated champions. Joke 3. You shake your head, wipe your hands, and follow the smell of lunch back home. Back inside the longhouse, the adults return to their weaving, carving, and quiet scheming, but the children have different priorities. They turn the benches and the packed earth floor into a playground, scattering bones, sticks, and imagination everywhere, like little gods inventing a universe. If you're expecting solemn Viking youth training for battle, you're going to be disappointed, and also pleasantly amused. These kids are busy staging a chicken heist with carved toys and sheep skulls for helmets. Mainstream fact, play was very much part of Viking childhood. Archaeologists have unearthed carved wooden animals, miniature swords, and board games such as Hnefatafl, a strategy game sometimes called the Viking chess. Childhood wasn't just work and discipline. It was peppered with play that trained skills, fostered imagination, and occasionally annoyed tired parents. You watch two boys roll a polished knucklebone across the floor. It clatters and stops, and they squeal as though fortune itself just whispered in their ears. Knucklebones, you learn, could be used like dice, sometimes for games, sometimes for divination. Tonight, it's definitely a game. The boys argue about who rolled higher, their voices rising, until an older sister intervenes with the final authority of, "Because I said so." They accept it. You realize this dynamic hasn't changed in 1,000 years. A girl proudly displays her wooden horse, crudely carved but clearly loved. She drags it through straw as though it's galloping across meadows, complete with whinnies supplied by her own mouth. Another child, jealous, tries to claim it, but is distracted when someone produces a clay whistle shaped like a bird. The whistle squeaks like a goose being insulted, and suddenly the longhouse fills with giggles. You clap your hands over your ears, smiling anyway. The Viking Age has invented its own version of the toy that annoys parents endlessly. Joke 1. Quirky tidbit. Some children's toys discovered in graves include small boats carved from wood. You can almost see the scene. Kids floating them in streams, pretending to raid the neighboring village of frogs. For families tied to the sea, the toy boat wasn't just play, it was practice. A miniature rehearsal for a life where water meant travel, food, and sometimes war. Nearby, a group of older children settle into something calmer, a game board scratched into a wooden surface. Pebbles serve as pieces, and the strategy game unfolds. Hnefatafl isn't symmetrical like chess. The defending king tries to escape to the board's edge while attackers swarm. Watching the kids argue over rules, you recognize a universal truth. No matter the century, somebody always accuses somebody else of cheating. Historians still argue whether games like Hnefatafl were played more by adults or children. Some sagas depict warriors passing time with the game, but evidence from settlements suggests boards and pieces were common in households. Tonight, it seems both true. The kids play with pebbles while one older man leans in, pretending not to advise but clearly directing moves like a backseat coach. Meanwhile, two toddlers invent their own entertainment, chasing the Longhouse cat. The cat, unimpressed, leaps onto a bench, tail swishing with disdain. One toddler bursts into tears at the rejection, while the other switches tactics, offering the cat a crust of bread. The cat accepts the tribute with regal calm, proving once again that cats run the universe, even in the Viking Age. Joke 2. You notice how play weaves seamlessly into chores. A girl tasked with carrying firewood balances sticks on her shoulders like a tightrope walker. A boy helping to churn butter pretends he's wielding a spear, making dramatic thrusts with every churn. Parents don't scold, they smile faintly, knowing the work is still getting done. Childhood here isn't a separate stage. It's braided into the rhythm of the household. Quirky tidbit again. Some toys weren't toys at all. A piece of carved bone or an oddly shaped stone might become a doll, a treasure, or even a magical talisman in the hands of a child. The line between game and ritual is blurry. One boy shows you a small stone with a hole through it, claiming it keeps away trolls. You nod solemnly, because you're not about to argue with someone who believes his pebble is superhero armor. As the evening deepens, the children grow louder, bolder. They stage mock fights with wooden sticks, shrieking as they clash. Parents glance over but don't intervene. Practice with play swords is as natural as climbing trees. Still, when one boy lands a particularly dramatic blow and the other collapses with theatrical groans, an older man can't resist leaning in with dry humor. "Too much blood. He'll never survive supper." Everyone laughs. You laugh too, realizing sarcasm is also hereditary. Joke 3. Historians still argue how much freedom Viking children had. Were they disciplined harshly, or allowed to explore? The sagas show both. Stern fathers and indulgent games, chores mixed with wild play. Watching tonight, you sense the balance. Kids learn responsibility by living it, but their joy is not stifled. Play is training, yes, but it's also laughter. Eventually, the younger ones tire. One curls against a parent, thumb in mouth, wooden horse still clutched in hand. Another drops onto a bench, head on a folded cloak, asleep before the others notice. The older children keep playing, quieter now, the clack of game pieces mixing with the soft crackle of fire. The Longhouse hums with both adulthood and childhood, two layers of life running in parallel. You smile, realizing that even in a world of sagas, raids, and gods, kids still just want to chase cats, argue over dice, and fall asleep mid-game. And maybe that's the most timeless thing of all. The children's laughter fades into background noise, and your attention drifts toward the women of the Longhouse. If you've been picturing them only weaving in corners, think again. They are the gears that keep the entire machine turning. Without their labor, the benches would be bare, the bellies empty, the ale flat, and the household chaos. You sit quietly, watching, and begin to see the invisible architecture of authority. Mainstream fact: Viking women often managed the household, especially when men were away on journeys or seasonal raids. Keys were a symbol of this authority, often worn at the belt. Archaeologists have found them in women's graves, suggesting the role was respected and enduring. A woman's control over stores, food, and cloth was more than domestic work. It was economic power. Near the hearth, one woman tends a loom tall as a doorway, threads stretched taut. She passes the shuttle back and forth, each movement measured, steady, almost hypnotic. Cloth grows slowly, but it grows. Every inch is future tunics, sails, or trade goods. You marvel at the patience required, then realize you've checked your imaginary watch 3 times already. This weaving is a marathon, not a sprint. Joke 1. Another woman leans over a large vat, peering into froth. Ale is brewing. The smell is yeasty, earthy, alive. She stirs with a long wooden paddle, muttering about the heat of the fire. Brewing wasn't just a hobby. It was central to diet and hospitality. Weak ale hydrated, stronger ale celebrated, and if it spoiled, the household felt it. You sip from your cup, appreciating that someone, somewhere, once decided to let grain water ferment and declared the result a good idea. Quirky tidbit: many Viking women carried small knives at their belts, used for food prep, weaving tasks, or anything requiring a quick cut. The knives were practical, but sagas sometimes mention women brandishing them in arguments, proving domestic authority could have a sharp edge. You notice one such knife glinting at a woman's side as she scolds a boy for spilling milk. The boy obeys immediately. You would too. Another corner holds quieter power. A woman lifts a lid on a chest, checking the stores. Inside are bundles of cloth, jars of butter, and a small pouch of silver. The keys at her waist jingle faintly, announcing ownership. In this world, to hold the keys is to hold survival itself. You wonder what modern symbol compares. Maybe a wallet, maybe a smartphone. But nothing feels as direct as the clink of keys that lock and unlock the winter's food. Historians still argue about the exact freedoms Viking women held. Some argue they had unusual rights compared to elsewhere in Europe. Divorce, property ownership, and inheritance were possible in some regions. Others suggest these rights were limited, often dependent on family or class. Watching this household, you sense that, whatever the law code said, the daily reality was simple. Women ruled the home, and no one dared question it when stew, ale, and clothing depended on them. One young woman sits with a spindle, twisting flax into thread. She hums a tune, the whirl spinning like a toy in her fingers. Every few moments she pauses, examines the thread, then continues. It looks meditative, but you suspect her mind is racing with lists. What needs to be cooked? What needs to be mended? Who needs to be nudged into finishing their chores? You've seen that look before. It's the multitask stare that could run empires if empires would just listen. Quirky detail again. Viking women often made charms and small ritual objects, tying together the spiritual and the domestic. A sprig of juniper by the hearth, a carved bead at a child's neck, a whispered prayer as she spun. It's hard to tell where practicality ended and belief began. Tonight, you notice a woman brushing herbs across the fire, the smoke curling upward. She doesn't explain, but she doesn't need to. The gesture itself is explanation enough. You can't help but notice the balance of labor. Men may plow, hunt, or hammer, but women weave, brew, cook, heal, and command. Neither can function without the other. But inside the longhouse, it is the women's rhythm that sets the pace. Meals don't appear by accident, nor does clothing, nor does order. One man tries to boast about his hunting trip, but the women's raised eyebrows silence him faster than words. You realize sagas may celebrate warriors, but sagas were written by people who wanted to eat. Historians still argue whether sagas overemphasized male heroics while downplaying women's authority. Some sagas feature strong female figures. Lagertha awed the deep-minded, but many leave women in the margins. Excavations, however, keep revealing graves of women buried with wealth, tools, or even weapons, challenging assumptions. Watching these women at work, you sense those sagas left out the most constant heroism of all, the daily weaving of survival. A woman walks past, her brooch catching the lamplight. Strings of beads clink softly. She pauses to scoop a child into her arms, balancing the little one on her hip without breaking stride. The child tugs at her necklace, fascinated, while she continues scolding a man across the room about firewood. You marvel at the multitasking, affection, adornment, authority, all in one step. Joke 2 sneaks in when a boy tries to pilfer a piece of cheese from the chest. His mother turns, eyes sharp, and without a word, gestures with the knife at her belt. The boy retreats instantly, hands raised in surrender. The room chuckles, and you join them, glad you weren't the one caught. By evening, the women settle into a circle, weaving, chatting, sometimes laughing at jokes that don't include the men. Their voices are lower, but their presence fills the room. You realize you've been watching not just a household, but a parliament in wool. Decisions are being made. What to save, what to cook, what to mend, who to nudge. No loud declarations, just quiet, unstoppable authority. Joke 3 arrives when one woman mutters that her husband would starve if she left him alone with the stores. The others nod, laughing. You laugh too, because you've seen that truth proven across centuries and continents. The men grin sheepishly, but they don't argue. They know better. You lean back, soaking in the sight. Keys glinting, looms humming, ale bubbling, children soothed, food measured. The longhouse is alive because of this rhythm, this unseen government of hands. You begin to understand that the sagas might not sing about these women, but the longhouse itself does, every day, in the language of survival. The fire dims, the chores ease, and suddenly the longhouse feels like it has inhaled and decided to hold its breath for a moment. This is when stories surface, when voices soften, and when the rafters seem to lean in closer. You settle on your bench, wrap your cloak tighter, and wait. Storytelling isn't just entertainment here. It's glue. It binds children to parents, neighbors to kin, and the living to ancestors. Mainstream fact: sagas and storytelling were central to Norse culture. Though most were written down later in Iceland, the oral tradition was alive in homes like this long before ink touched vellum. Stories carried history, myth, and identity. To forget them was to risk losing yourself. Tonight, you are folded into that tradition. A man clears his throat. Silence ripples through the room as people turn toward him. He begins not with a roar, but with a measured tone, like a drum warming up. The story unfolds. The tale of a farmer who tried to outwit a troll by hiding in a haystack, only to discover the troll had the same idea. The punchline lands, and the room chuckles. It's less epic than you expected, but somehow more charming. Not every saga needs blood and thunder. Some are about hay and awkward trolls. Joke 1. Across the hearth, a woman offers her own contribution. She recites a riddle, her voice lilting, playful. I am always hungry. I must always be fed. The finger I lick will soon turn red. The children shout answers. A wolf. A dragon, until one boy, smug, says, "Fire." The woman nods, grinning, and the boy beams as though he's just won a duel. Riddles, you realize, are training grounds for wit as much as entertainment. Quirky tidbit. Some sagas mention poets known as skalds, whose verses could immortalize deeds or humiliate enemies. Their wordplay was considered powerful enough to make or break reputations. In this longhouse, you don't have a skald with a harp, but you do have an old man humming verses of a song he claims to remember from his grandfather. It's less about melody than cadence, but it lulls the room the way modern lullabies do. Children cluster near the fire, eyes wide. A girl cuddles her wooden horse, mouthing along with the familiar parts of the story. A boy imitates the troll's growl under his breath, earning a shush from his mother. You catch yourself leaning forward too, as though the fire's heat isn't enough. You want the warmth of the words. Historians still argue whether sagas told in homes were primarily mythological, historical, or humorous. Written versions emphasize kings, gods, and battles, but daily life suggests families also cherish local tales, funny anecdotes, and moral lessons. Tonight's mix supports that theory. Myths might dominate winter feasts, but everyday evenings often belong to lighter fare. The man telling stories now shifts into a tale of Thor disguised as a bride to retrieve his stolen hammer. Everyone laughs at the absurd image. Thor, god of thunder, stomping down an aisle in a dress, while Loki whispers mischief. Even the grandmother chuckles, shaking her head. You realize that humor in myth isn't accidental. It's deliberate, reminding everyone that even gods stumble into ridiculousness. Joke 2 sneaks in when someone mutters that Thor looked better in a veil than their uncle. The room erupts in laughter, and you nearly choke on your ale. Some humor is timeless. Teasing relatives will never go out of style. Another voice joins in, this time a young woman. She begins a quieter story, about dreams. A girl dreamed of a white bear that came to her bed, and the next day a suitor arrived with a gift. The household listens, not laughing now but nodding. Dreams carry weight here, omens folded into sleep. Even when stories amuse, they also remind. The world is layered, and the unseen always brushes the scene. Quirky tidbit again. Some riddles and songs were designed not just for entertainment, but for memorization practice. Long verses helped children remember genealogy, landmarks, or even farming instructions. A rhyme about when to sow barley might be disguised as a playful chant. You watch as children echo lines, clapping along, and realize this is education disguised as fun. Historians still argue about how much literacy existed in the Viking Age. Runic inscriptions survive, yes, but not in abundance. Many suggest oral storytelling was the dominant way of preserving memory. Sitting here, you agree. The runes may mark stones, but the sagas live in voices, faces, and smoky air. The fire crackles louder as a man tosses on a log. Sparks shoot upward, briefly golden against the roof. The story now is about a sea serpent, longer than the fjord, wider than 3 ships. Children squeal, gripping each other, eyes darting toward the shadows as if something scaled might slither from the dark corners. Adults smile knowingly, letting them shiver just enough before the punchline. The serpent was only a fisherman's exaggeration. Laughter restores the warmth. Joke 3 arrives when the storyteller adds, and then he swore the fish was this big, spreading his arms so wide he nearly topples into the fire. Someone saves his cup, someone else claps him on the back, and everyone laughs at both the exaggeration and the near miss. As the stories weave on, you realize the longhouse itself participates. Shadows on the beams become actors. The hiss of the fire punctuates sentences. The rafters echo voices into a chorus. This isn't just storytelling. It's performance, ritual, and lullaby. You lean back, smiling, letting the words wash over you like the tide. By the time the last riddle is solved, and the last story drifts into silence, the children are half asleep, leaning against parents. The fire glows low, lamps flicker, and voices hush. Stories, like meals, have filled the room. You yawn, not from boredom, but from the soft spell of words settling into dreams. By now, the Longhouse is humming with more than just daily routine. Tonight, visitors arrive, stamping frost from their boots, cloaks heavy with the smell of travel. The door curtain lifts. A rush of cold air follows them in, and suddenly, the benches shuffle to make space. A guest changes the entire temperature of the room, not just with their stories, but with the quiet politics their presence carries. Mainstream fact, hospitality was central to Norse culture. Laws and sagas alike mention the importance of offering food, drink, and shelter to travelers. A poorly treated guest could turn into a damaging rumor, while a welcomed one might bring valuable news, alliances, or trade. Feasts, whether grand or modest, cemented these relationships. The newcomers remove their cloaks and hang them near the door. Their cheeks are red, their fingers stiff, but their eyes brighten as bowls of warm stew appear in their hands within minutes. The host nods, satisfied. Feeding guests quickly is etiquette. Keeping them waiting would be a stain on household honor. You notice how even children peek curiously, whispering about whether these visitors are kin, traitors, or just neighbors with gossip worth sharing. Quirky tidbit. Seat placement mattered. In bigger feasts, the high seat by the central post was reserved for honored guests or heads of household. Even here, in a more modest gathering, there's subtle choreography. Guests are nudged toward better spots near the hearth, while locals squeeze onto the outer benches. A boy tries to reclaim his favorite seat, only to be reminded with a look that status trumps comfort. He sulks but obeys, muttering under his breath. You sympathize. Ale is poured, bowls are refilled, and suddenly conversation blooms louder than before. One guest shares a story of a market across the fjord, where traders offered amber beads in exchange for cloth. Another talks of a cousin sailing toward the east, chasing whispers of silver-rich lands. You sip your ale, listening, realizing that feasts are news networks disguised as meals. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were primarily social or political. Was the laughter genuine, or just a cover for negotiations? Tonight, you see both. Someone jokes about goats eating laundry, while, 2 benches over, men lower their voices to discuss pasture rights. You realize you're in a world where a good punchline can grease the wheels of a serious deal. The food tonight is stretched a little further to accommodate extra mouths. Flatbread is piled high, salted fish circulates, and a chunk of lamb is carved thinner than before so everyone can taste it. Guests compliment the cooking, and the women nod, half pleased, half aware that they're being flattered as much as thanked. You smile. Hospitality is theater, but it's theater everyone willingly plays. Joke 1 surfaces when a guest, lifting his bowl of stew, declares loudly, "This is the finest meal I've had since last winter." Someone shoots back, "That's because you ate my stew last winter." Laughter ripples, tension loosens, and spoons continue clinking. Children, thrilled by novelty, orbit the guests. One offers to fetch more ale. Another shows off a carved toy, angling for praise. The visitors indulge them, smiling and patting heads. The dog, sensing fresh targets for crumbs, sidles close and rests his head on a stranger's knee, eyes tragic and persuasive. Within minutes, he's rewarded with a bone. This dog knows the politics of begging. Quirky tidbit again, feasting wasn't only about food. It was also about memory. Songs might be sung to honor ancestors, or to remind everyone of lineage. One guest hums a verse about his grandfather's voyage, his voice low and rhythmic, and the room quiets to listen. It's less about the words than about claiming continuity. We were here, and we remain. As the ale flows, you notice subtle rivalries peek through. One man boasts about his hay yield, while another brags about the size of his oxen. Everyone chuckles, but the undertone is clear. Feasts are arenas where egos wrestle gently under the table. No one shouts, but everyone keeps score. You wonder if tomorrow someone will check just how big those oxen really are. Historians still argue whether women played a visible role in these negotiations. Some sources suggest they poured ale and kept silent. Others hint that their words, even whispered, could sway outcomes. Watching tonight, you lean toward the latter. A woman pours ale into a guest's cup, then murmurs something to her husband. Moments later, he adjusts his offer in conversation. Coincidence? Probably not. Joke 2 arrives when a guest, chewing loudly, praises the salted fish. Better than what the gods eat. A boy pipes up, "Then why don't you share it with them?" The room explodes with laughter, and the guest sputters, caught between pride and mock indignation. The boy beams, proud of his wit. You clap softly, impressed. The feast stretches into a rhythm. Eat, drink, talk, laugh, repeat. The fire glows brighter with every log tossed in. Smoke curls upward, thick but fragrant, carrying herbs thrown in for good measure. The rafters echo with voices, laughter mixing with the crackle of wood. You glance around, realizing that what looks casual is actually a performance honed by generations. Every guest leaves with a memory. Every host gains a reputation. Quirky tidbit once more. Some households kept a special guest bed or bench, slightly more comfortable, as a sign of hospitality. Tonight, a visitor is directed towards such a spot, draped with a fresh sheepskin. You note the gesture, subtle but significant. Comfort is currency here. By the time bowls are empty and cups drained, the longhouse hums with contentment. Guests lean back, bellies full, hands warm, voices hoarse from stories. Children drowse against parents, the dog snores in victory, and the cat, true to form, has claimed the warmest guest's lap. Joke 3 closes the night when one guest, standing to leave, groans dramatically and declares, "I'll need 2 oxen to carry my stomach home." The host grins, pats him on the back, and replies, "Good, bring them here tomorrow, we're short on oxen." Laughter follows him out the door into the cold night. You watch the curtain fall back into place, the longhouse settling into quiet again. Guests have come, eaten, joked, and gone. And the longhouse, steady as ever, breathes them in and out like tides. Hospitality isn't a choice here. It's survival, respect, and memory woven into one. The fire has settled into its evening glow when someone groans quietly from the far bench. A woman rises with a small basket, the kind you've seen her guard like treasure. Inside are herbs, cloth strips, and a few tools that look halfway between kitchen utensils and magic charms. This is the household healer's moment. If you've been thinking medicine in the Viking Age meant nothing but prayers, you're about to discover a world that is equal parts practical, herbal, and occasionally questionable. Mainstream fact: Viking medical care combined herbal remedies, simple surgeries, and a strong dose of belief in charms and ritual. Texts like the later Lacnunga show Anglo-Saxon parallels, and sagas mention healers preparing poultices or chanting verses while treating wounds. The healer wasn't a doctor in the modern sense, but often the most knowledgeable person in the room about plants, bones, and which gods to ask for a favor. The groaning man has a swollen ankle, likely twisted while hauling hay. The healer examines it with calm detachment, pressing here, turning there, while he winces. Then she mixes crushed herbs, maybe comfrey or yarrow, with animal fat, smearing it gently over the swelling. She wraps it in wool cloth, murmuring instructions to stay off it. You're tempted to joke about ice packs and ibuprofen, but here, fat and plants are the pharmacy, and faith is the anesthetic. Quirky tidbit: earwax was sometimes used as an ingredient in salves. Yes, earwax. You're glad tonight's remedy skips that ingredient. The healer pulls a face as if to say she's aware of the oddity too. Still, in a world where everything has potential, even earwax earns its place. You decide not to ask what's in the other jar, just in case. Meanwhile, a child with a cough is given a steaming cup of herbal tea. Honey drips in, sweetening the bitter leaves, and the child grimaces before swallowing. The honey coats the throat, the herbs soothe, and the mother pats the child's back gently. A lullaby follows, soft and steady, because half the cure is comfort. You sip your own ale, and think modern pharmacies could learn something about bedside manner. Historians still argue how effective Viking medicine truly was. Skeptics say most treatments were superstition, with herbs playing only a placebo role. Others argue that many remedies, like willow bark for pain or yarrow for wounds, genuinely worked. Watching the swollen ankle wrapped snugly, you suspect the truth again lies between. Belief and biology worked hand in hand, and survival meant trying everything. A woman across the room ties a small bag of herbs around her neck, muttering about keeping away night spirits. It's part medicine, part magic. Children also wear charms. Carved amulets, small Thor's hammers, even beads believed to guard against illness. One boy insists his bead stopped him from sneezing all week. You nod gravely, unwilling to argue with such scientific confidence. Joke 1. The healer now checks a cut on another man's arm. She rinses it with a sharp-smelling liquid, fermented whey or ale, before binding it tightly. Infection is the enemy, even if they don't name it. You notice her muttering under her breath, half prayer, half poem. Words, here, are stitches as much as thread. The man grits his teeth but doesn't complain. He's grateful for both the bandage and the whispered protection. Quirky tidbit again. Viking-age surgical tools have been found. Forceps, scalpels, even trepanning equipment for drilling into skulls. Whether those skull patients survived is another matter. You imagine lying on a bench while someone decides your headache requires a hole in your head. You pat your own skull protectively and hope tonight no one volunteers for that experiment. Joke 2. Around the hearth, gossip joins the healing. Someone mentions a neighbor who swore by fish liver oil for chest pain. Another tells of a woman cured by sleeping with a carved Thor's hammer under her pillow. Everyone nods, weighing the claims as seriously as a doctor's prescription. Knowledge spreads in stories, each anecdote another page in the community's medical book. Historians still argue whether healing was a specialized role or shared among women of the household. Some graves suggest dedicated healers, buried with herbs and tools. Others imply that every woman had enough knowledge to manage basic care. Tonight, you see both. One woman leads, but others contribute advice, pass herbs, or fetch water. Healing is communal, not solitary. The patient with the ankle leans back now, bandaged, sipping ale as though it's also part of the cure. Someone jokes that he just sprained it to get out of haymaking. The room laughs, and he grimaces good-naturedly. Humor, too, is medicine, easing tension. Even the healer cracks a smile, though she insists he stay off it or risk worse. He nods obediently. Joke 3 arrives when a boy, watching the healer's work, asks if drinking more ale would cure his homework. His mother cuffs him gently, the room laughs, and the healer replies, "Maybe, but then your mother would be sicker than you." You laugh too, because sarcasm apparently cures boredom as well. By the time the baskets are closed and the herbs tidied away, the room feels calmer. The wounded are bandaged, the coughing soothed, the charms tied. You realize medicine here isn't sterile or separate. It's woven into the longhouse life, like weaving, cooking, or storytelling. Illness is met with herbs, prayer, humor, and patience. It's not perfect, but it's survival, and survival is the strongest cure of all. You pull your cloak tighter, breathing in the scent of herbs still drifting from the hearth. Somewhere behind you, the healer hums quietly, her voice like a low spell over the room. You close your eyes for a moment, thinking that maybe that's the real medicine, to feel cared for in a house full of smoke, warmth, and hands that know what to do. You're half dozing now. But the longhouse doesn't just belong to humans. It belongs to the unseen as well. The rafters creak, shadows lean, and someone near the fire drops a handful of herbs into the flames. The smoke curls upward, fragrant, almost deliberate. You realize you're watching a conversation, not just with the people in the room, but with powers that live beyond the turf walls. Mainstream fact: Norse households blended everyday chores with constant gestures toward belief. Gods like Thor, Freyja, and Odin were honored. But so were land spirits, ancestors, and nameless forces woven into daily life. Charms and omens were not extraordinary. They were expected. The longhouse was as much a shrine as a shelter. A woman ties a sprig of juniper above the doorway, muttering that it keeps trolls out. The children nod solemnly, as though trolls have been spotted in the yard last week. A man spits into the fire after mentioning a neighbor's misfortune, a reflex to ward off envy. You notice that faith here isn't grand, it's casual, woven into gestures so small they seem invisible until you notice them. Quirky tidbit. Carved Thor's hammers were worn like necklaces, sometimes plain iron, sometimes ornate silver. They weren't just jewelry, they were declarations of identity, especially during the spread of Christianity. Tonight, you see one glint at a man's chest as he adjusts his cloak, the firelight making it pulse like a heartbeat. He touches it absent-mindedly, the way someone today might touch a cross or a lucky charm. The conversation turns to dreams. One boy admits he dreamed of wolves circling the house. His mother frowns, rubbing his hair, while an older man mutters that it means change is coming. Another woman insists it only means the boy is eating too much meat before bed. Laughter follows, but you can feel the unease too. Dreams here are not dismissed, they're maps, even if the directions are fuzzy. Historians still argue how literally the Norse took omens. Were dreams and signs binding prophecies, or just casual musings? The sagas swing both ways. Some characters follow dreams to glory, others ignore them to their peril. Sitting here, you suspect the truth is simpler. Dreams mattered because life was uncertain, and any hint of guidance was welcome. The fire cracks, and someone begins a small chant, half prayer, half song. It's directed to Freyr, god of fertility and harvest, asking for good fields and healthy animals. The words are simple, but the rhythm is steady, like rocking a cradle. No one mocks, no one interrupts. The room sways slightly with the repetition, and you realize prayer here isn't about dogma, it's about reassurance. Quirky tidbit again. Some households kept protective staffs, carved poles or staves with runes etched into them. They could be placed near the door, the hearth, or even buried in fields to guard crops. You glance toward the doorway and notice just such a pole, its carvings darkened by smoke. It looks like a walking stick forgotten too long, but the family treats it like an unspoken guard. Joke 1 bubbles up when a boy insists his missing wooden horse must have been stolen by elves. His sister snorts, pointing out that he left it under the goat, and the room bursts into laughter. Even Faith leaves room for teasing. An older woman recounts a story of a neighbor who ignored an omen. A raven sitting 3 nights in a row on the same roof beam. The neighbor scoffed, until a storm tore his barn apart. The room murmurs agreement. Don't tempt ravens. Don't tempt fate. You glance toward the rafters, half expecting to see black feathers glinting. Historians still argue whether Christianity blended peacefully with Old Norse beliefs or clashed violently. Archaeology shows both. Thor's hammers found alongside crosses, pagan burials near Christian ones. In this longhouse, the mix is seamless. Someone mutters a prayer that sounds vaguely Christian, while another spits to keep away the vetir, the land spirits. Faith is layered, not exclusive. Quirky tidbit again. Charms weren't only for protection. Some were for luck and love. Women might carry small carved figurines or herbs believed to attract suitors. Tonight, a girl giggles as her sister teases her about the sprig of love herb tucked in her pouch. She blushes, hiding her face, and the longhouse roars with gentle laughter. You grin too, because matchmaking clearly hasn't changed in 1,000 years. Joke 2 arrives when a man swears his aching tooth was caused by a night spirit crawling inside. Another man offers to chase it out with ale, and the room groans, laughing. You nearly choke on your drink, appreciating the timelessness of cures that just happen to involve more alcohol. The fire hisses, the herbs pop, and someone quietly places a loaf crust on the shelf reserved for spirits. It's small, almost invisible, but the gesture is serious. Bread for humans, bread for spirits, everyone eats tonight. You sense that this balance, this sharing, is what keeps the house whole. As the night deepens, the room grows quiet again. Someone whispers about hearing the Huldufolk, the hidden people, near the stream last summer. Another swears he saw a light moving through the woods. The stories layer into the smoky air, half believed, half feared, fully lived. Joke 3 closes the evening when a boy mutters, "If the spirits want bread, Maybe they can churn butter too. His mother cuffs him gently, the room laughs, and you find yourself smiling into your cloak. Belief, you realize, isn't solemn here. It's woven into humor, chores, and daily rhythm. You lean back, eyes heavy, as the Longhouse breathes with gods, spirits, and dreams. Faith isn't separate from life. It's folded into every gesture, every crumb of bread, every laugh in the smoky dark. Word count 1090. Time stretches differently in the Longhouse. Days blur into chores, nights blur into stories. But seasons? Seasons mark everything. They are the chapters of the year, shaping not just the land outside, but the very rhythm inside. You blink, and suddenly you're aware of how the house feels in winter versus summer, how the same beams and benches shift personality as the year rolls by. Mainstream fact: Viking life was deeply seasonal. Winters demanded hoarded food, smoky fires, and long nights indoors. Summers were for farming, sailing, and building. The Longhouse was elastic, adapting its mood to each season, as much a calendar as a shelter. In winter, the Longhouse becomes a cocoon. The fire never truly dies. Smoke clings to every cloak, and the air is heavy with stew and damp wool. You imagine weeks when the snow piles so high against the turf walls that stepping outside feels like walking into a frozen cave. Children grow restless, turning bones and sticks into games. Adults weave, carve, mend, and gossip until the walls themselves seem to hum with repetition. The Longhouse groans, but it holds. Quirky tidbit: socks were sometimes knitted not with needles, but using a looping technique called knoll binding. They're warm, but the stitches are tight and uneven, leaving bumps that rub against your toes. You glance down at the socks drying by the fire and wonder who had the patience to make them, and whether the gods forgive the curses muttered in the process. When you pull on a pair, the wool feels scratchy, but warm, and you bless whoever invented the joy of dry feet. Joke 1. Spring shifts the mood. The air thins, light stretches longer, and suddenly everyone is restless to get out into the fields. The Longhouse breathes easier as doors stay open longer, letting in fresh air. Herbs sprout in pots by the doorway, animals give birth, and children squeal as lambs bounce awkwardly across the yard. Inside, meals brighten with fresh greens, and the smoky heaviness of winter stews gives way to broths that taste almost like optimism. Summer turns the Longhouse into a launching pad. Doors flap open constantly as people rush in and out. Fields to tend, hay to cut, journeys to prepare. The benches empty during the day, only filling again at night with exhausted bodies. Meals are quick, laughter sharper, tempers sometimes shorter under the press of labor. But the air smells of fresh grass, flowers, and salt from the sea. The fire is smaller now, less about warmth and more about cooking. Shadows in the rafters shrink, and light paints everything gold. Historians still argue whether summer was more exciting or exhausting for Viking households. The sagas celebrate voyages and markets, but archaeology shows the backbreaking labor of haymaking and farming. Watching the Longhouse tonight, you sense both are true. Summer is when dreams expand, but backs ache. Autumn, though, is the Longhouse's busiest season. Harvest piles up in chests, barrels, and baskets. The smell of drying fish fills the rafters. Apples shrink into wrinkled sweetness. Grain sacks line the benches like squat guardians of the winter ahead. Everyone is a little anxious, counting, measuring, wondering if the stores will last. Feasts appear too, partly to celebrate, partly to reassure. See, we have enough to spare. The Longhouse glows with gratitude, and a little bravado. Quirky tidbit again. Dried cod, known as stockfish, was so hard it could double as a weapon until soaked. Imagine gnawing on a plank of wood calling it dinner. You watch as a man bangs one against the bench to prove its toughness. A child squeals with laughter, daring him to bite it dry. He declines politely, and the room laughs louder. You decide you'd rather soak it too. Joke 2. In winter again, darkness stretches like a blanket that never ends. The Longhouse becomes theater, temple, school, and fortress all at once. Stories last longer, jokes grow sillier, and patience wears thinner. You picture snow drifting against the turf roof, sealing you in like a tomb and a cradle. Yet somehow, laughter still rises, steaming into the rafters along with the fire's smoke. Survival is heavy, but humor lightens the load. Historians still argue whether winters here were crushingly grim or quietly tolerable. The sagas emphasize hardship and hunger, but artifacts show games, toys, and crafts that suggest creativity flourished indoors. Sitting here, you believe the Longhouse invented boredom's antidote long before smartphones: talk, tasks, and teasing. The seasons carve not just the year but the mood of the house. Each brings its own soundtrack: crackling frost, bleating lambs, buzzing flies, whispering harvest winds. The Longhouse doesn't resist. It adapts, reshaping itself with rushes on the floor, herbs in the rafters, or smaller or bigger fires. You realize the building is as alive as the people, bending with the seasons like a tree. Joke 3 arrives when a boy sighs loudly in winter, complaining he's bored. His sister suggests he go count the icicles on the roof. He does. By the time he comes back, 3 new ones have formed. She smirks, and the room laughs, because siblings will always invent chores for each other across centuries. You lean back, listening to the crackle of the fire, and feel time ripple around you. Frost, thaw, bloom, harvest. The Longhouse is all seasons at once, a capsule where years blur into rhythm. You yawn, wondering whether you're hearing wind, waves, or the future in the rafters. The benches creak one last time as you ease yourself down, pulling a blanket around your shoulders. The fire has shrunk to a soft orange glow, more ember than flame, the kind of light that prefers whispering to shouting. Around you, the Longhouse exhales. Snores rise in gentle waves, punctuated by the occasional cough, a child's sigh, or the dog shifting positions at the foot of the bench. The air is thick with smoke, wool, and sleep. Mainstream fact: most Viking families slept communally in their longhouses, benches serving as beds for adults and children alike. Privacy was rare, but warmth was constant. In winter especially, being close meant survival. Archaeological evidence from excavated longhouses shows benches lined with straw bedding, sheepskins, and the occasional chest doubling as a headboard. You tug your cloak tighter, nestling into straw that crunches faintly beneath you. It smells of grass and earth, sweet and dusty, softened by the wool blanket draped over it. Your neighbor is already asleep, breath steady, while across the aisle a child mumbles a dream about goats. Someone chuckles softly, half awake, then drifts off again. Even in slumber, the Longhouse feels like one shared body, breathing, murmuring, turning. Quirky tidbit: some households placed protective objects beneath pillows or bedding, carved amulets, bits of iron, or herbs to ward off nightmares. Tonight, you spot a sprig of dried mint tucked discreetly into the straw. You can almost believe its scent keeps the dark at bay. You add your own modern superstitions silently. May the straw not poke too sharply at your ribs. Historians still argue whether dreams were taken as literal prophecies or just curiosities. Some sagas treat dreams as destiny, others use them as plot devices to foreshadow trouble. Here, they're treated seriously enough to be retold at breakfast, with nods and debate over their meaning. For now, though, dreams are personal, folded quietly into the dark. The Longhouse is a chorus. A baby whimpers, soothed by her mother's hum. The dog snores like a soft drum. A man coughs, the sound deep but fading. The cat leaps silently to the rafters, tail flicking in victory as it claims the highest perch. You smile in the dark. Even asleep, the house is alive. Joke 1 slips into the stillness when a boy rolls over and mutters, "My straw is poking me more than the goat did." His sister giggles in her sleep, and you stifle your own laugh, not wanting to wake anyone. Humor, you realize, never goes to bed. The embers shift, cracking softly, sending a faint glow across the beams. Shadows dance like tired spirits stretching before rest. You trace them with your eyes, your thoughts drifting. The fire feels like a heartbeat, slow and steady, the pulse of the Longhouse itself. Someone shifts nearby and whispers a short prayer, words too low to catch. Another person crosses themselves, blending old and new beliefs in a single sleepy gesture. Protection is sought even in half-dreams. You feel it too, a sense that in this house, beneath this roof, you're folded into something larger than yourself. Joke 2 sneaks in when the dog sighs so dramatically it sounds human, and someone murmurs, half asleep, "Don't worry, tomorrow's stew will be better." A ripple of muffled laughter moves across the benches before fading back into silence. Quirky tidbit again. Archaeologists have found remains of soot-blackened rafters above sleeping benches, suggesting people slept directly beneath layers of smoke. You glance upward and imagine centuries of families blinking through the haze, muttering about ventilation, yet staying because warmth trumped fresh air. You cough once, softly, then grin. Authentic experience, you think. The longhouse breathes. The people breathe. You breathe. Sleep creeps closer, tugging at your eyelids like a patient child. The benches feel softer than they should. The snores become lullabies. The crackle of fire a rhythm. You let your eyes close, surrendering to the hum of this ancient house. Joke 3 lands just as you drift off. A man mutters in a dream-filled grumble, "If Thor wanted me to chop more wood, he'd give me better arms." The room chuckles softly, the fire cracks, and then even laughter falls asleep. You nestle deeper into the straw, cloak pulled tight, the longhouse around you pulsing with warmth and silence. It feels like you're not just in a house. You're in history, wrapped and rocked until morning. And now, as the longhouse quiets fully, the night stretches into its longest breath. You feel the warmth of embers fading slowly, their glow no longer lighting the rafters, just pulsing faintly like tired stars. The straw beneath you settles, sighing into stillness, while the wool across your shoulders holds you in its scratchy but gentle embrace. The house is not silent, it never is, but the sounds soften until they blur into a single lullaby. Snores overlap, a dog sighs, a baby whimpers and is soothed. The fire gives one last crack before dozing. All these sounds merge into a rhythm older than sagas, the sound of people surviving together. You feel it wrap around you, a quilt of voices and breath, and you let yourself sink into it. Outside, the wind brushes across the turf roof, faint and distant, like the sea whispering far away. The walls hold steady, thick with smoke, herbs, and history. Inside, you are safe. The omens, the trolls, the cold, the hunger, all of that belongs to daylight. Night belongs to rest. You close your eyes. The rafters above become a blur of shadow, then nothing at all. Your breathing slows, joining the longhouse's own rhythm, as though you've been folded into its heartbeat. The straw rustles one last time as you shift into stillness. Let go. Drift. The sagas can wait. The chores can wait. The whole wide world can wait. For now, there is only warmth, steady breath, and sleep waiting patiently. You are carried by a house older than memory, steadier than fear, gentler than you imagined.